Welcome to the Cloudless Mind podcast about neuroscience and non-duality. Introducing your host, Paul Smit.
All right, we're here back at the Cloudless Mind podcast with the second episode with James Cooke, a neuroscientist, a very open-minded neuroscientist, because they're not all... Just describe a little bit. I mean, one of my friends, Aisha Sapora, she's also a neuroscientist, but she's also totally open to non-duality, to spirituality. But sometimes she would find that hard talking with other neuroscientists who are less open-minded to it. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, so I think I definitely unconsciously kind of felt that, and whether or not it's true that people would have been closed-minded, I preemptively didn't really share this with a lot of people in my work life, and this is there was actually one experience when I was giving a talk, because my work in neuroscience is directly motivated by the stuff we're talking about here. How it is, the reality is a single system, but we live in some kind of dream state, and I'm interested in what is that dream state? How does the brain do that trick? But usually I'm talking about it to my colleagues in the scientific language of neuroscience. But at the end of one talk, I added in a few slides where I tried to explain non-duality, and as I was trying to point it out, it precipitated one of the most extreme kind of moments of non-duality I've ever experienced, where my sense of self fully vanished, and there was this witnessing of the scene of this audience, and there was no James there was just the room.
Yeah.
To the point where I let out a kind of a strange sound, because I wasn't trying to disappear, and I had this whole audience looking at me, and I felt like I flashed out of existence. But they had no idea what I was talking about. So, so yeah, I'm open-minded, but let's hope my brain doesn't fall out from being too open-minded on this stuff.
Yeah, it sometimes can be hard to. I did find it hard that when you, at some point in your life, realize that there's actually the witnessing, there's the awareness in which everything appears and disappears. So then the way you look at thoughts and feelings, it's totally different.
Oh, absolutely.
Before, I thought I was my feeling and I had to do something with it, or I thought I was my thought. That was really weird. So, but then going back and having normal social interaction with people, sometimes that's still a bit hard, because people come up to me with problems, and I don't know. I'm like, yeah, but you are not this problem. You're not this thought pattern.
Yeah.
There's something looking at it. And people look at me like a rabbit staring in the light bulbs of a truck,
I find generally being able to not be caught up in the flow of your own thoughts, being able to step back and witness, allows you, though, to, I'm sure without realizing it, you're probably functioning in a lot more harmonious way with these people than other people are. If you're not getting triggered unconsciously, by being identified with thoughts, I think it gives you a capacity to be more just one step removed in a healthy way, to witness what the situation needs. But I've definitely experienced that, where I'll be talking about something very negative that's happened to me, and to someone, and they'll be commiserating with me. But then I'll be coming at it from this perspective of just witnessing it, and I'll comment on just but on the other hand, it's kind of really beautiful. the pain is really beautiful,
Yeah.
And then people were like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. So that could be quite hard to explain if you're not familiar with this way of just beholding everything, really.
Yeah, true. Let's go a bit deeper. So in the Advaita, they would say you are the consciousness in which everything appears and disappears. And then even a tougher question might be, what is consciousness?
Yeah, so we may have to do an extra podcast about this in a couple months, because I'm so in my research that I've been focusing on what the philosopher David Chalmers calls the easy problems of consciousness. So this is a slightly tongue-in-cheek naming, but he referred to the easy problems and the hard problems, and all the problems are actually quite hard. But but he knows that. And so the easy problems would be something like, how is it that right now I'm not getting confused between the bits of sound wave that correspond to your voice and, say, the sound of the rain in the background? And these are the kinds of experiments I'm interested in, where you're looking at populations of brain cells, and you're interested, as a piece of engineering almost. How is it doing this? How is it separating out the signals? And we can get a handle on this through pretty classic experimental science because we're dealing with the brain, in the real world. But in the background, I've also been working on a theory of consciousness that tries to get at what's called the hard problem of consciousness, which is essentially just the fact that it's like anything to be this physical system that we are right now, right? Yeah. The fact that the lights are on, that there's this experience dimension. Yeah. Why can't I just be a blind automaton where there's no consciousness? And so I have a theory that I'm very happy with that for me satisfies me, as to why this is the case. Yeah. I'm about to publish it, and the thing is, in science, you can't really talk about things before it comes out in the scientific literature, so I can't go into the theory itself. But I would love to come back and talk about it in a few months. On a less this is like a neuroscientific theory, so of consciousness. But to answer your question on the more kind of contemplative or philosophical level, consciousness is just this fact of experiencing. It's quite hard to define, but it's the fact it's like anything to be this system. And that's quite a good saying, that it's like something to be this thing we call James. Is people vary on how whether or not this gives them the right intuition here. But the way that it kind of helps me think about it is to think, if you reassembled my atoms into a piece of wood, if we think that piece of wood isn't conscious, or we want to ask the question, is it conscious? That's the way to think about it. Do the lights go out? Is it just a blind physics with nothing happening? And there are people who are called panpsychists, with this position that maybe everything is conscious. And this gives you a way of saying, well, a panpsychist would say that the lights would stay on. There would still be something it's like to be a piece of wood. Yes. I'm not a panpsychist in that way. But so consciousness is this experiential, feeling tone of the lights being on, is how I would describe it.
And some neuroscientists say that consciousness is merely created inside the brain due to a functioning of the brain, because they could see movement from the older parts to the brain to the neocortex and back, and these are triggers that people are aware of something. How would you look at that?
Yeah, so what I can say about the way I think about how the brain mediates consciousness is that consciousness is an attempt to know an external reality. Yeah. So reality before life was just a single soup of physics, and it still is a single soup of physics. We're just physical stuff as well, right? Yeah. But we're doing this strange trick where we're keeping our form, essentially. So rocks, if a rock in the ocean will just get worn away until it's just sand in the ocean, and everything just, this is entropy. This is the second law of thermodynamics, which is everything just decays, essentially. Entropy is decay, but life is anti-entropic. Life resists decay. And so that's why we have a feeling of an internal world, and as opposed to an external world, So to me, it doesn't make sense to ask if a rock is conscious, because a rock is a concept that you and I have in our brains. Yes, true. Physics doesn't say rocks are anything other than even empty space. It's all just physics. But there's a kind of, you could talk about the physics of life being one level removed and being like, well, actually living systems, this isn't a very rigorous way to say it, but like you could say that living systems are kind of things in a way that rocks aren't really things, from the perspective of physics. They're things in the sense that they really are defining themselves as opposed to the environment. So when you get a brain, what you're doing, its primary function seems to be to create a simulation of that environment in order for you to function there. Yeah. So the theory that I'll be publishing soon is intimately bound up with this idea of creating this duality of an internal world and an external world. But it's kind of one thing I'm very happy about with it is it combines non-duality with duality, which I didn't think that was possible until I came up with the theory. It made sense to me. Then I looked at it and was like, wait a second. Looked at from two different ways. Yeah. There's the non-dual truth of the living organisms. They're just more physics. They're still part of the same substrate of reality, but it accounts for why we have this feeling of duality. Yeah, of some inside and outside.
So imagine that all creatures that we would normally say have consciousness, like animals, maybe trees, plants, who knows? Without consciousness, what would be left in this universe?
Yeah, so I think, well, first, actually, it's worth saying, I agree with you. Basically, I think all living systems have consciousness. That's where, and it's good to see that you agree, because in science, that's seen as a non-mainstream view. Okay. And so what's happening in science when it comes to consciousness is very similar to what happened with us feeling our position in the universe to be, thinking the Earth was the center of the universe. Then we thought, okay, well, the solar system is, and we have to we're just gradually resisting this idea that we're really, really special. So if you go back to the 60s, even, we're talking about like half a century ago, people really in science thought that humans were conscious and that's it. There's not much more to say. Yeah, and then it was like, okay, fine, maybe apes are. And it's right now, I can't remember who said this, but there was a paper which was arguing that the consensus in science seems to be that maybe mice are, but below mice, maybe not. And it's so arbitrary and, really not based on anything apart from your feelings of your own specialness and then empathy for these other, organisms. But also it's bound up in an idea that consciousness is cognition, that consciousness is thought, and which it's not. The way we're talking about consciousness is it's this quality. It's this and it's very, very simple. It's like space. Space doesn't require some huge machine to make it. It's a very simple thing. Yeah. And similarly, consciousness, I think it's not going to turn out that you need some huge consciousness generator and the brain is somehow making this other material, which is how most of science thinks about this stuff. But instead, it's this very simple aspect of reality, which I think is bound up with being alive. And actually, in the kind of Advaita classic, I Am That, there's a book. In that
from Nisargadatta
exactly
yes.
One of the answers is it's written in this question and answer format, and one of them he talks about how life and consciousness are just intimately bound up. He says you can't have life without consciousness and you can't have consciousness without life. And if I read that I think I had read that before many years ago, and just thought, okay, that sounds like a random claim. I don't know why you would say that. I think, it's to do with brains and plants probably unconscious and, all this stuff. Yeah. And then I came up with this theory, and then I came back to it years later, read that line and was like, wow, I think he's intuited what I finally caught up with. That, it's to do more with the life process than it's to do with brains.
Yeah, true. It's also, scientists came up to Ramana Maharshi, who lived in Tiruvannamala in India. And they would tell him like, wow, there's a whole universe out there. And he's like, there's not. And they call it the Drishti Shishti or Shishti Drishti. So is there an external universe and do we witness that? Or is the universe merely created inside our apparatus? Yeah. And he would say, the dream is created inside this apparatus that you call the brain. But there's not a real universe like you think out there. Yeah. And he's also, you think I'm sitting here. I'm not sitting here. I'm appearing inside your small awareness. Yeah. And scientists were like, what is he talking about?
Well, I feel like there's so when it comes to the experiential side of non-duality in Advaita, I think, it's the most important, probably the most important thing anyone could ever learn. But when it comes to talking about the kind of metaphysics of reality, there are a few different directions you can go in, and no matter which one you go, it doesn't change the significance of these states for your own well-being, and so that's quite a radical, there's only really consciousness way of looking at reality. And I'm trying to do something where I'm like, something that's tricky and maybe not, maybe ill-advised, but I'm trying to combine a scientific worldview where we assume that the reality beyond our perception is really there, that there's something there, It's not directly knowable, but that physics is really dealing with some stuff, and and then
you could say that there are waves and quarks bumping
exactly
around. Okay.
And then there are bits of physics that, like us, that are trying to know reality, and that's consciousness. And so this is the kind of picture I have, but none of that really changes the experiential quality of this stuff, which is the important thing, and the crucial insight that you are not this personality. That's the that you are not this self.
If you just have a small, tiny bit of research, then the self is so fickle.
Yeah.
It's I like what Ramana Maharshi did, because people would come up to him like, I'm John, and he said, "You're not John. That's your name. But if you change your name, are you still you?" And then you can go on like, okay, are you your body? Okay, cut off your legs, cut off your arms. Like, you're still there. Okay, now replace your heart with a machine. Are you still there? And then eventually people think, that's what Alan Watts would say, oh, then I am somewhere behind my eyes, between my ears. And of course now, thanks to neuroscience, we know that there's not even a solid part of the brain that creates this I. It's a whole functioning and bumping around of neurons where suddenly the experience of an I arises. But seeing or understanding that, what does that change for the apparent human being?
Understanding that. So I when I talk about this, I found very valuable. There are certain teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, which the teachings are called Mahamudra and Dzogchen, in two different kind of old schools of Buddhism, and they're very similar to Advaita, but the language is slightly different, and the language resonates with me more, I would say, because, as you say, that there's this. We're starting with this feeling of I, right, and that I is not real. It's this, as you say, this like bumbling around of neurons just creating this strange impression. It's not even a thing. It's just a vague feeling of there being something inside our heads. And in the Tibetan way of talking about this, they're very just direct with the fact that that's just an illusion. There's not more to say, and that then they will talk about the nature of consciousness. This kind of, they talk about it being almost like a crystal ball, like this like pristine, pure, luminous, ever-present space in which everything occurs.
Yes.
And for me, that way of thinking about it is a good way in, because there's no room for confusion. It's a big ask to ask someone to believe that their self doesn't exist. But when you get it, you really get it, and there's no confusion. There's the self is gone. The other way of getting into the same insight, given that people are so attached to this idea of self, in Advaita, is to talk about the self being everything, self with a capital S, right? So you're like, this small self is an illusion, but actually you're like, am I my body? No. Am I my thoughts? No. And then the idea is I am this consciousness. But conceptually, the I am is unnecessary. All you need is the word consciousness. All you need is
true. I agree.
No one in Advaita would. This wouldn't be worth arguing about at length with because the insight is the same with someone in Advaita.
No, but sometimes the misconception is that people then think, okay, I'm not this small I. Now I have to be the big I, and then you're identified with something else, and then you're back in the illusion again. I think Buddha would say you're the unborn or unmanifested. So by saying it in a negative approach, you can't be something if it's I'm the unborn. It's nothing to grab, nothing to hold on to.
I think I can't remember where I read it, but I think it was maybe in the Dzogchen teachings. There was something about saying that this state that we're talking about is beyond consciousness. And up until that point, I'd been thinking intuitively, almost in a very Advaita way, of like, I am consciousness, like I am pure consciousness, or something like that. And for a while that sat with me, and I didn't know what to make of that until I kind of finally got it, and broke through to this kind of space where that is truly beyond concepts, where once you say realize that consciousness is just another concept, or non-duality is another concept, even I think in the Advaita teachings, they talk about how the teachings are not the truth. The teachings are put like a finger pointing to the moon, they would say. And so, you kind of, the non-dual reality of reality that's beyond concepts. It just is. That's probably the best you can say about it. It just is. And if you drop everything, there it is. And
true. That's why they called it Advaita, which means not two. So they would even say it's the truth. So it's all one. They won't even say that. They
refusing to offer a concept, refusing to offer a definition, right? Which is, it's a good point. It's a very clever way to do it.
And also, I like what Ramana Maharshi said. He's like, Advaita is merely a concept, but it might be the last one.
Yeah, it's a very useful concept, I would say.
All right. Thanks very much, James. To me, it's like very exciting stuff to talk about. It's great to find someone who's even a neuroscientist and into this weird stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've just started trying to talk to people about it more, as you mentioned, on my YouTube channel, which is Dr. James Cooke, if you don't mind me.
Oh yeah, just promote yourself a little. How can we find you? I will add the link to our video also, but how can we find you?
So it's Dr. James Cooke with an E on the end on YouTube, and pretty much everywhere my handle is Dr. James Cooke with an E. On Twitter and Instagram and everywhere. So subscribing on YouTube is probably the best place to find me, and I try to be diligent at replying to the comments there. So that's a good way to get in touch.